Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ibrahim Thiaw. I'm the Executive Secretary of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, essentially the UN treaty that is dealing with land degradation and droughts. I'm very pleased to be here with you today, and we will have a very exciting panel discussion today on issues that we do not hear much about. How environmental degradation is affecting our security, and how security issues are also affecting the environment. We know that 7 million people in the world are killed every year due to air pollution. We know that land degradation and drought are also killing a lot of people from around the world. We know that extreme weather events are affecting human life and economies from around the world. We know that water scarcity and scarcity of fertile land is also affecting people from around the world. But how much of that is actually taken into consideration by the security apparatus in the world? How much our security, human security, national security, and global security are really treated as they should do by people dealing with security issues in the world? Most of the time, in many countries in the world, security issues are only concerned about national security, armed forces, intelligence services. But we know that the environment is also affecting us deeply. So today we will be having an exciting panel discussion with eminent panelists, and I would like to really give you the chance to listen to them first. Then I'll come to the room for some questions and some answers, and we will hopefully have a very interactive dialogue today. Let me start with Ilwad Elman, who comes from Somalia and is a rights advocate and COO of the Elman Peace Center. Somalia is known as a country that is dry, affected by land and desertification. To what extent these issues are really at the center of discussions in your institution, but in Somalia as well? Elman.
Thank you very much.
Elman. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and this discussion that we're having right now about safeguarding the planet and securing people couldn't be any more timely. And it certainly isn't a new conversation to Somalia and to the world. But it's only been in recent years that we have begun to draw the strong correlation and the intersection of the two crises of human security and the crisis that is caused by environmental stressors and environmental degradation. In Somalia, we find ourselves right at the nexus of that. And this has implications that there's a wealth of knowledge and research on already, but whether it's massive displacement. Currently, we have nearly 3 million people displaced internally within Somalia, a country that only has a population of 15 million people, of which 80% are under the age of 30. We see food and water resource scarcity, and because of that, creating tensions between farmers and herders. We have rising temperatures, and all of this is causing a lot of challenges, not to just human security, but it has a direct linkage to the desperation that it yields young people particularly to be motivated to join armed groups and other factors that provide them sustenance. And the impact of the environmental stressors and almost cyclical climatic shocks that happen on a 5-year rotation, where we have droughts and famines where hundreds of thousands of lives are lost like clockwork each 5 years, is something that can be prevented. It is something that is causing and fueling displacement and migration. And when we're looking at peace building, sustainable peace building, where my organization focuses on the rehabilitation and reintegration of young people back into the communities under our Drop the Gun, Pick Up the Pen campaign, as a peace building practitioner, we began focusing on climate resiliency, not because our main mandate was climate action, but because our peace building interventions were not sustainable, because the environments we're sending people back to are changing so rapidly. So the effects of the climate change and environmental shocks within Somalia and throughout the region are not unique to my country, but we find ourselves in an elevated scenario that I think creates an opportunity to learn and to look at practical solutions. And the topic is certainly on the agenda for the Somali government. We have our first Ministry of Climate and Environment ever, and so prioritizing it and backing it with the political will is a key step in addressing these issues.
Thank you very much. I understand that there are some mic issues, so maybe that can be fixed meanwhile. Let me move to Minister Al-Jubeir from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I was very privileged to have COP16 of the UNCCD hosted by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia last December. And by all means, this is not me talking, it's basically the world saying that this is the best ever COP organized by the UNCCD in its 30 years life in experience. One of the issues that was discussed there was environment and security, how land degradation is affecting national security and international security, the links with migration. Can you elaborate from your perspectives as minister and not a minister of state in charge of foreign affairs, but also special envoy on climate. So you have these issues on your daily life, so to speak, in terms of development. Can you elaborate a little bit more how you see these issues from your chair?
It's very simple. They're critically important. We have land that's being degraded, so we have less land available every year. We have populations that are growing, so we have more need for food production. So we're facing a food shortage. This will lead to migration, it will lead to conflict, it will lead to wars, and we have to then come in, engage in peacekeeping, engage in reconstruction, engage in rebuilding. It would have been much easier to deal with these issues at the outset. When we look at conflicts that we're dealing with today, I think you've mentioned Somalia, of course. Sudan, the conflict in Sudan goes back to a drought in Darfur decades ago. When you look at the Sahel countries, most of the conflicts there stem from drought. The Great Lake in Chad receded by 60% over the last 60 years or so, displacing millions of people. When people have nothing to eat, they move to places where there is food, there's conflict, there's bloodshed, and all of a sudden it becomes violent. There's migration. Migration upsets the political and social balance of countries that receive those migrants, and we see that in Europe, which gives rise to extremist politics and creates instability. The link is very, very clear, but we have been not paying sufficient attention to it, and our objective at COP16 was to highlight that the issue of land degradation is not an issue that's limited to desert countries in North Africa and the Middle East, but that it impacts the whole world. We see declining levels of water in the Rhine, which displaces or affects shipping in the Rhine. In Germany, we see land degradation in Southern Europe. We see land degradation impacting climate, which impacts weather patterns, which impacts oceans. We see the impact of this also in the Panama Canal, where shipping is impacted because it affects the rainfall that contributes to operating the lifts within the canal. So it's a very simple equation. Land degradation leads to conflicts, leads to violence, leads to extremism, leads to terrorism, leads to migration, leads to political instability, and leads to all of us paying an extremely high price to deal with the consequences of an issue that, had we paid attention to at the outset, would have cost us a fraction of the resources to do. So our objective, one of the objectives at COP16 was to highlight the link between land degradation and security.
That's absolutely right. The links between land degradation and security, the links between environmental issues in general and security. We can go as far as the Pacific Islands and see how people are affected by climate change, and even some nations being affected in their very existence by environmental issues. We know that in Latin America it is the same with the dry corridor. We see a lot of impact on human security, and people are forced to flee. We see it in Haiti, where land degradation is has led to a massive migration. It's all over the world where actually the links between environment and security issues are clear. But we have situations where actually conflicts can lead to environmental degradation. And that is what I want the Minister Vitalii Koval to talk about from agrarian policy and food security in Ukraine. In Ukraine, what is your perspective as to the links between conflicts and environment? Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you. Used to translate. Дійсно, кожна країна.
Indeed, every country and every person considers the situation through the lens of its own particularities. We have been in war for 3 years. And when it comes to the environmental impact, believe me, nothing impacts drastically climate and environment as war. The war destroys everything and destroys as well the lands. You know that Ukraine delivers food for 400 million people all over the world. And the mines that are scattered all over the Ukrainian territories undermine this access to the food and blocks this access to the food for 18% in the world. Back in 2022, at the very beginning of this full-fledged war, our grain corridors, export corridors, were blocked, and we couldn't deliver this export, and 60% of our income, state income, is provided from the agrarian food export, and we have drastic consequences. Over 230,000 kilometers are being mined and should be demined. Our water basins are destroyed and mined. For example,
the Kakhovka Dam, for example, the Kakhovka Reservoir was destroyed, and the overall surface area is more than some countries. 600 square kilometers was flooded, which was a huge problem for the world. So this is very important, that the world community should elaborate new mechanisms to respond, and these mechanisms need to be immediate. Not tomorrow, not sometime in the future, today, now. And this relates to the access to financing for the farmers. The farmers close to the front line. Unfortunately, they are not able to get funding through the banks. They are not able to get a loan because this is seen as a high risk. Yes, it is a high risk, but we need to start elaborating the instrument of war insurance. It's important to come up with these instruments, these tools that the world community could use. And it makes me happy that the communique of our agricultural ministers of the world that was signed in Berlin last week includes a provision about the condemnation by the world community of the aggression of Russia. And it talks about the impossibility of blocking food corridors. Grain should be going where it needs to go. We need to support this. We have countries with a terrible situation with food, such as Syria and some countries in Africa. We would like to be able to help them rapidly. And this help needs to come within a matter of days, not within a matter of weeks or months or years. This is why we urge on the world community to come up with a mechanism for rapid reaction. This needs to be a complex mechanism, logistical mechanism. There need to be logistical hubs in different countries so we're able to send this food where it's needed. And of course, it is absolutely unacceptable that food corridors, sea corridors, should be blocked. And the initiative by the Ukrainian president called Grain from Ukraine has shown this to the world. When countries can help us with finances, and Ukrainian farmers are sending their food, their produce to the countries that need it. For example, to Syria, for example, to the Middle East and to Africa. It's important. It's important for the world community to be united and to be in solidarity. Only together we can overcome their consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll come back to you for another set of questions and to expand a little bit more. Let me come back to you, Mrs. Elman. You are Somali origin, and when the world hears you talking about these issues, they think that, yes, because she is Somali and this is an issue of concern only to developing countries, it is not a global issue. What do you have to tell them?
I mean, I think now more than ever, we know that this is not an issue that is confined to the developing world or the global south. I mean, we're hearing here from the Minister of Ukraine talking about the impacts of the nexus of security and safeguarding nature. And this is a global issue. And we do see some progress now as we look at climate financing and looking at adaptation and recovery and bringing on board Africa. But I do feel the responsibility also to react to some of the comments from the minister that, you know, countries like Somalia used to be the breadbasket of Africa. So a sustainable solution is not looking at how to fix the supply chain so that Somalia can continue to get aid and access to grains and wheat that we can also cultivate and historically have, but look at how the protracted conflict, 33 years of conflict, have decimated those industries. And so this is a global issue. The fires most recently in California remind us of that as well too. And we are affected by it in different ways. Resources are distributed in a way that is, I would say, still very imperialistic, and the entire discourse of climate change has only recently shifted from a very global north perspective, overlooking the lived realities, the indigenous best practices and solutions from communities on the ground. And so there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in that space. But certainly this is not an issue where we need to save Africa or save Somalia. And that hasn't worked. Over 33 years of charity, of investments, it's integral in saving lives, which we need right now because we are facing food insecurity. But with that also needs to be investment in the full supply chain. We have an overwhelming majority of young people, and a recent study that we did in partnership with the Kofi Annan Foundation and CIPRI and the Global Challenges Foundation revealed that there is a direct pipeline from farms to arms. Young people in communities like Afgoye and Lower Shabelle, where they used to be working on their families' farms, are joining extremist groups, not because they are subscribed to the ideology, but want to either protect the farmlands of their families, to be able to take their goods to market, or to be able to survive. And so there's so many factors that are hyper-localized, but consistently reaffirming that the two issues are interconnected, and the frameworks that we have in place, maybe just to wrap up here, need to look at this as a global issue, not only a development issue, and to see the urgency of climate change as a matter that needs to be prioritized within the chambers of security discourse. In 2021, under the presidency of Ireland and Niger, the Security Council. I had the honor of being the civil society briefer at the Security Council on a historic resolution on climate change and conflict, and an overwhelming majority of more than 111 UN member states were in favor of it, but then it was vetoed. And so we need to also recognize how these agendas need to be tabled in spaces that are able to move the agenda forward and recognize it as a security threat of global impact. And if the Security Council is not the place for that, other avenues need to be explored.
Thank you very much. From farms to arms. And the question is, how can we take them back from arms to farms? Because essentially the response that we have right now from around the world to the issue of forced migration is to basically fence oneself and to say, don't come to my place. Instead of helping those migrants to stay back home, taking them back to farms and helping them produce their own food, what is left to the young Somali or to the young Haitian to do if they cannot produce anymore in their country, if they have no dignity anymore in their country, if they cannot feed their family anymore? What is left to them but to flee? So it is not that people are just wanting to move. It is because they are being forced by nature to move to the next city, to the next country, or further afield. Let me come back to you, Minister Al-Jubeir, because multilateralism is really in your DNA. This is your business. You are a professional diplomat for foreign affairs, climate change, desertification, international negotiations. Saudi Arabia hosted recently the UNCCD COP16. And these issues were discussed amongst other issues. How do you see the future of the world when Mrs. Elman says, we have proposed something to Security Council to respond to these issues, and the Security Council responded negatively, yet millions of people from around the world are being affected by these issues there. But the response that we have today, including multilateral response, is more to take care of armed forces rather than taking care of other additional forces that are killing us and affecting human security, world security. So what is your view on how these issues should be taken care of by the multilateral system in the world?
If it's not efficient enough, you do it unilaterally. In Saudi Arabia, we launched the Middle East Green Initiative, where we brought in more than 22 countries in our region to help those countries adopt what we call a circular carbon economy approach to dealing with climate change and environmental issues, to dealing with combating desertification, to dealing with being able to plant. We've combined that with what the Saudi Development Fund does in terms of financing projects for sustainability, financing roads, infrastructure, so that not only can you plant, not only can you combat desertification, but start planting, but also be able to transport those plants and be able to export those plants. So we're looking at a holistic, comprehensive approach to allow countries to develop that part of their economy so that they have the ability to A, feed themselves, which leads to more stability, and B, be able to contribute to improving environment, whether it's desertification or climate change. We established early warning systems for dust, and we adopted that at COP16 to provide warnings in terms of dust storms so that countries can engage in preemptive measures, whether it's as simple as staying at home so you don't have respiratory issues to issues that impact our security. So we are doing these things, and we're doing it with partners. We are working with countries to ensure that there is enough supply of fertilizer, because after the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it impacted the fertilizer production and exports, which in turn impacts food production, whether it's in South America or Africa or Asia. We wanted to fill that gap. The the complications that resulted from Ukraine's inability to export grain because of the blockade on its ports had an impact on food security around the world. And we saw that manifest itself in riots, whether it's in South America, in Africa, in Asia. So we had to step in, work with other countries to provide support and to ensure that we have a flow of food and grains and fertilizers and so forth in order to contribute to stability. Now, which is our sense of the multilateral project, and you mentioned this early on, unfortunately the discussion was always a North-North discussion. And our sense is it has to be a North-South discussion and also a South-South discussion, and that's what we are trying to engage in. The other aspect of it is we would rather increase the action and reduce the talking, because we had at COP, the climate COP, the loss and damage fund, $100 billion committed to, and it took more than 10 years before people decided that they actually need to put money in it. And then it still hasn't been dispersed. So meanwhile, countries like Saudi Arabia have gone out and provided developmental assistance to countries and to help them with infrastructure, with desalinated water, to help them with farming, to help them with education, to help them with terminals, exports, and so forth. So go back to your issue. Multilateral is great, multilateralism. It's great to be able to talk and express views. But if those talks do not lead to concrete results, there should be nothing in the way of preventing countries who have the means to engage with other countries directly and put in place mechanisms that actually work.
Thank you very much. I wanted to also mention that in Riyadh, under the leadership of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there was a Riyadh Drought Resilience Partnership that was launched with more than $12 billion pledged essentially by Saudi Arabia and members of the Arab Coordination Group to help the 80 poorest countries in the world deal with the issue of drought, from early warning systems to drought resilient seeds to helping build resilience of ecosystems and build resilience of economies, and of course, where necessary, come up with humanitarian aid to save lives. So the Riyadh Drought Resilient Partnership is one of the concrete outcomes of this COP16. And I also wanted to very much thank the government of Saudi Arabia for the Middle East Green Initiative that is going to support countries from Central Asia to Africa and of course across the entire Middle East. Let me come back to you, Minister. We know that the conflict in Ukraine, Minister Koval, is having serious consequences not only on the countries that is in war, but to other countries by and large. You talked about the food crisis and the impact it is having. You talked about the pollution and the impact on water bodies and ecosystems. From the global point of view, how can we expect state conflicts to be compounded by other environmental events and contribute to wider geopolitical destabilization? How do you see this? You take the conflict of Ukraine and the situation there in your country as an example, but how do you see it in a wider point of view, and what lessons the world should learn from this situation?
Very good question, very valid question. Thank you very much. Any conflict aims at destroying a country. Any aggressor aspires that the only thing that normal life is destroyed and the economy is destroyed. Friends, let me go back to 100 years ago to understand the DNA of our country. We all hear that our farmers, Ukrainian farmers, are very resistant. Let me recall 1932, 1933, when the Russian occupation just banned Ukrainians from gathering and yielding crops. That was a deliberate famine, a deliberate genocide. 10 million Ukrainians perished back in 1933. The country which fed the whole world lost 10 million people because of famine just this past century. And after that, when we recovered our forces, the DNA of every Ukrainian has this feeling that we need to raise, we need to start working, because we need to anticipate any crisis, food crisis. There might be any new genocide. 400 million people all over the world depend on Ukrainian food. It's all about resistance. And I would like just to encourage our partners and colleagues from Somalia, from Saudi Arabia, if only we want to contribute to resolve this food crisis in the world. We need to help countries all over the world become self-resilient, self-sufficient, because people in those countries do not need to depend on the external help. We need to transfer know-how, knowledge, assistance to help people gain resistance. This is very important. And there is another aspect which I want to spread, an idea that I want to spread and to share with Saudi Arabia. We have a project that in Ukraine we call Shoulder to Shoulder. The districts and regions which we're neighboring and just next to the front line suffered a lot. And we launched an initiative within our country which designated one region within the country that was a little bit farther from the front line, which had to help the regions which were next to the front line. So I would like to spread this idea all over the world. If there is a country which is sufficient and can help those who are more vulnerable, they need to act. And this initiative works. Today, we're rebuilding the regions which are deoccupied. For example, we have western regions which help Kherson, Zaporizhia, and so it works. And when it comes to our responsibility for environment,
everything that happens in the world, to a large extent, happens because of nature. And our job is to pass on the wealth of nature to the next generation, and we would like to pass not less than what we received from our parents, but more. Even in a difficult time such as war, we need to think about recovery, how to build back better, how to rebuild better than it was before, build to new standards, build to a new understanding of bioeconomics and sustainable systems, even in the time of war. It's important. Thank you.
How to rebuild better, how to regain that relationship we had with nature, because conflicts, they generate a lot of pollution from chemicals, from weapons. Conflicts leave landmines, affect agriculture, affects livestock, affects water bodies. So the world has learned some lessons, but we have not yet learned sufficient lessons to know that these conflicts may have long-lasting effects on ourselves way after the war is over. Let me give you the chance now in the room here. I understand there are many people who are connected online, but I am unable to communicate with online people connected online. But I do have the privilege of having a mic that will be given to anybody in the room who may have an intervention or a question or a recommendation.
Thank you all for the presentation. It was really insightful. And I understand that there are a lot of different causes.
Can you just introduce yourself, please?
Yes, of course. My name is Moses Ngong. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a Global Shapers, part of the Young Professionals group that's a part of the World Economic Forum. I understand that there are a lot of different causes for environmental degradation, conflict being one of the ones that a couple members of the panel have a lot of expertise in. But I understand, coming from the United States at least, that corporate development and corporate growth tends to be a really big cause of degradation as well. And I'm wondering if you all have any experience or practices that you've seen kind of curb the worst parts of development and growth so that the environment can be prioritized as we try to grow our economies or stabilize our countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me have another question from here.
Thank you very much. My name is Hindu Umaru Ibrahim. I'm from Chad, and I work with indigenous peoples. So, Minister, my question to you, COP16 have been really very successful, as Ibrahim said, and as I witness it. How do you going to use the result of the COP16 to make the life of the peoples who are impacted by land degradations, migration, and security to be a better life?
Thank you. Any other question from the room? If not, maybe let me, well, Minister Al-Jubeir, this is a direct question. Maybe you can, or you can also respond to the second question, and then I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I think with regards to what we do about ensuring that, that we have economic growth while maintaining the environment, I think it's very simple. You adapt policies, you adapt standards, you encourage businesses to engage in clean energy, and you encourage businesses to invest in new technologies, and you levy fines against businesses that don't, or you reject them outright. The point I want to make before I come to your question, because I think they're linked. When we have been talking about degradation and conflict and the need to do something about it, what we haven't mentioned is how profitable this is. We're not asking countries to provide financial aid to do this, maybe in the beginning. But we have, the United Nations has determined that for every dollar invested in land restoration, the benefits can be anywhere from $7 to $30. This is like investing in high technology. We need to make the business community aware of the profit potential for investments in land restoration and industries associated with it, in order to attract a lot of private capital that can help move us to a better place. But the most important part in all of this is making people aware of the problem, which I believe people are increasingly aware of it, of the need for a solution, that this is not just confined to a certain region of the world, that this impacts everybody around the world. And then number three, that this is not charity. This is linked to our security and our well-being, and this is also very, very profitable potentially. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. This is what we're trying to do with our partners in the United Nations. With regards to your question about what are we going to do, we want to do everything we can. We want to link developmental assistance with investments. We established a fund called ZIXAB to invest that would be a sandwich between a developmental fund and between an investment fund to invest in projects that your typical investor will not invest in because the returns may not be sufficient from a financial perspective, but from a social perspective, the returns are incredible. So we have the ability now to invest in projects like this. So awareness, bring together all the resources, the commitments that are made, developmental assistance, direct our business community in that direction, make other countries aware of this, and pool resources with other countries to coordinate our efforts. Because this issue, as we mentioned in the very beginning, impacts every single person on the planet. And if we deal with it and invest in it at the beginning stage, it is a fraction of the cost in lives and in treasure that we will have to expend as this problem progresses.
Thank you very much. I wanted to give the chance to Mrs. Elman and Mr. Koval to react 1 minute each because the clock is ticking. Just your take on these questions. Mrs. Elman first.
Really just to echo what the minister also had mentioned, that we need to really focus on making the business case for action. And it's unfortunate that increasingly, even with the global energy crisis, that places like Africa are still being left out of the conversation. You know, countries that have solar energy, that have land that could be used, that could be providing energy to the rest of the world are not being included into these conversations. I think that's a missed opportunity, certainly. From a long-term sustainability perspective as well, too, from the peace-building perspective, having inclusive processes that actually look at engaging the local populace to also benefit from the process and to not just have handouts consistently contributes to all of the other spillover effects, whether it's migration, whether it's loss of hope, whether it's lack of identity, disenfranchisement. And what we need to see happening in places like Somalia, integration of indigenous communities, is having inclusive processes where they can actually benefit from it as well too, so that they can invest in resilience and support the growth of their countries and not always just be reacting.
Thank you very much. Minister Koval.
I thank you. About your question from the participant from the US about the role of corporate development and industrialization in general. Ukraine has a unique model of the agricultural sector. We have small producers, small farms, we have mid-sized farms and big producers. And sometimes you hear that Ukrainian agriculture is only large holdings. That's not true. That's only 23% of the total output. But it is the small holdings. Small farms are important members of the ecosystem. And it is very important that these farms should be drivers of growth, of development, that they should involve other farms, other players. There needs to be a comprehensive farmers' movement. In other countries, there are possibilities to involve farmers from their partner countries, and this solidarity based on cooperation is possible in a small region, in a country. It's possible also in the world when a stronger partner involves someone who is just developing, and the ecosystem becomes more stable, sustainable, and economical. It's possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just try to summarize this in 1 minute to make sure that we all have the same takeaways. My takeaway is that environment and security issues are very much linked. And actually, environmental degradation is affecting millions of people from around the world, probably affecting more people than wars do at the moment. Think of people that are affected by extreme weather events. Some nations are trying to rebuild after each weather event, and then 5 years later or 3 years later, they have to reconstruct again. Some countries are affected by slow onset events like droughts, and every 5 years, again, they have to restart from Sahel to Somalia to Syria and so forth. We have water scarcity coming to haunt us big time. Minister Al-Jubeir talked about the Nile River, but it's all over the world. We have floods that are coming to kill millions of people. Actually, water, either scarcity or excess of water, is killing more people than anything else, any other disaster in the world today. We have, serious consequences related to landslides and so forth. So it is important that our security systems respond to that and adapt to this situation, and not only be concerned about armed forces. Thank you very much again for your intervention. I want you to really give a round of applause to our panelists. And thank you again for your participation. Thank you.